Okay, welcome back for day last. Everybody had a good evening last night. And before we get started here, I'm going to turn to Executive Director Burton for any announcements. So, Eric?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, council members. No major announcements from me this morning, but I did just want to take a minute just to thank you all and everyone that's contributed to this process for putting in some time and extra time and effort, creative thought, and resiliency, especially related to some very difficult topics like groundfish comes to mind. And thank you all for staying late the other night. I know that's not easy to do, but I think that was a worthwhile discussion that we all had. And just want to express my thanks. So that's all.
Okay, thank you, Barrett. And so with that, I will turn to, where am I turning to? Turn to Patricia. Start us off on H7. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair and Council. Situation summary is we have Fiscal Matters. We had two attachments for this agenda item, the first one being the agenda and the second one being the Executive Director's report. We have one, and then we have one report from the Budget Committee and an EWG report with public comment.
Thank you, Patricia. And actually, I should have had Pete go to you first. So I passed the gavel to you, Pete. So proceed.
That's perfectly fine. Proof of the efficiency. So any questions on the overview? Not seeing any questions. We'll have Patricia read the report into the record. Please go ahead, Patricia.
We have agenda item H7A, Supplemental Budget Committee Report 1. The Pacific Fishery Management Council Budget Committee met on Friday, September 8th to consider several financial matters. These include the 2022 audit summary, a review of the calendar year 2023 expenditures through July 31st, the 2020-2024 cooperative agreement funding, this calendar year 2024 staff preliminary proposed budget, the Inflation Reduction Act, and planning for the council's next grant period. National Marine Fisheries Service West Coast Region Sustainable Fisheries Division Budget Update. Mr. Ryan Wolf provided an update on the status of fiscal year 2023 funding and noted that the fiscal year ends September 30th. And the fiscal year 2024 appropriations bill is still in discussion within Congress. NIMS is currently planning for the possibility of a government shutdown on October 1st if a bill is not enacted. Mr. Wolf noted that Department of Commerce is transitioning its travel, financial, and grant applications to a new system called Business Application Solutions. This transition is planned from October 1st to 25th and includes a hold on all non-mission essential travel in October. If the transition takes longer than expected, the travel hold may impact participation at the November council meeting. Mr. Wolf also summarized expectations for NIMS 2024 funding. Currently, the region is anticipating the potential of a 2024 budget that is reduced from 2023 levels. Audit and 2023 budget. Mr. Merrick Burton indicated that the calendar year 2022 audit results generally provide a favorable view of our financial statements and compliance with rules for federal awards. This has led to an unmodified finding in the report. The 2022 audit includes a finding that is carryover from 2021, which has been resolved. The 2020-2024 financial status shows
Recording in
20
progress.
million in IRA funding will be made available to the councils by NIMS. Present plans being communicated by NIMS headquarters indicate in order to secure portions of this funding, at least two proposals will be required of each council. The first proposal will be required to acquire an amount of $375,000 that is being made available to each council. The purpose of this funding is to assist in building capacity for taking on IRA projects, in particular capacity in the form of staff and/or contractors. The second proposal will need to be linked to special projects or actions that support the goals and objectives of NIMS as outlined for IRA funding. The second proposal should outline specific fishery management actions that address climate resilience and/or vulnerable communities, which can be in place on or before 2027. The process for applying for and securing IRA funds is still under development by NIMS. However, in anticipation of this funding opportunity, staff have been investigating projects that may qualify for IRA funding. At this time, projects currently on the council's 2024 agenda would appear to qualify. In addition, projects identified through council climate initiatives and fishery ecosystem planning efforts would also appear to qualify. Staff intend to continue examining candidate projects and the potential budget implications ahead of the November council meeting. Current list of projects identified for potential IRA candidates include Klamath and Sacramento Fall Winter Chinook Work Groups, HMS Roadmap, Gear Mapping or Gear Marking, Queets Spring Summer Chinook Rebuilding, Equity Environmental Justice, Climate Risk Tables, and Fishery Ecosystem Plan Initiatives. The BC made note of additional topics that would appear to qualify, including items identified through the Climate and Communities Initiative and other items under consideration by the council, such as halibut allocation. Committee of the Whole. The Committee of the Whole is being planned to assist in the development of the next grant cycle. This approach has been taken for several reasons. The council is currently on an unsustainable financial path. We have learned lessons over the last few years that may enable us to make more effective and efficient. Our next grant cycle will be needed to be structured to take these factors into account. The BC discussed how to structure the Committee of the Whole meeting agenda and asked staff to come back in November with added detail, which could be considered by the BC and the council. Additional matters. The committee discussed membership and confirmed Mr. Pete Hassmer to remain as chair and elected Mr. Mark Rolnick as vice chair. Budget committee recommendations. Request staff to develop 1, a 2024 provisional budget based on the approach outlined in the executive director's report to the committee. As part of developing this budget, continue to look for ways and places to trim unnecessary expenses. 2, draft a preliminary list of topics for IRA funding to be considered by the BC and council in November. This list of topics should be consistent with the year at a glance and provide details on the possible impacts of the 2024 budget. 3, a draft list of topics for a Committee of the Whole meeting agenda and an analysis that identifies the cost of funding to core functions and mandates of the council. And that completes the report.
Thank you, Patricia. Are there any questions regarding the Budget Committee report? And I don't see any hands raised. So we have one other report from the Ecosystem Work Group. And one of my screens went blank again. Yvonne de Rainier is online. Yvonne, were you going to read that report to us?
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chair. This is Yvonne de Rainier from the Ecosystem Work Group. I'll be reading from the Supplemental Ecosystem Work Group 1 for Agenda Item H7B. At our September 5th meeting, the Ecosystem Work Group discussed the Inflation Reduction Act funding process and the Council's efforts to develop proposals that would assist its ability to craft regulatory responses to the challenges of climate variability and change. We particularly noted that this council has already undergone an extensive process to review, understand, and prioritize potential actions to develop climate-ready fisheries under the scenario planning process of its Climate and Communities Initiative. The EWG typically reminds the council of follow-up tasks from the Climate and Communities Initiative under the council's workload planning agenda item. These tasks, which were first summarized for the council by its Climate and Communities Core Team in September 2021, are listed and updated below and could serve as a source of ideas for the Council's application for IRA funds. Much more extensive lists of ideas for developing management actions in support of climate-ready fisheries may be found on the Council's website for the Climate and Communities Initiative at the links to regional climate implications workshops, particularly in the priority actions sections of the linked worksheets. And we provide the worksheet links below. And then below those worksheet links, we provide an updated follow-up task list from the Climate and Communities Initiative. And I'll just say, if you do go to the links that we provided to the different regional workshops and you look at the slides indicated in our report, there are loads of ideas for things that the Council can do to prepare our fisheries for climate change. And they come from the wide variety of people who were attending our regional webinars as part of the Climate and Communities Initiative. So it's a good suite of people, some of whom may or may not be able to get to council meetings on a regular basis, and certainly many more people than commonly attend budget committee meetings. Thank you for that. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Yvonne. Any questions for Ms. DeRainier on the Ecosystem Work Group report? And I don't see any questions. Again, thank you, Yvonne. That will take us to public comment. We have one sign up. Wait for the screen to show up. There it is. Michelle Conrad. Michelle, are you with us this morning? Michelle, we see you here, muted, unmuted, muted again.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Vice Chair Hassemer and council members. I am providing comments this morning on behalf of Ocean Conservancy, Environmental Defense Fund, the Nature Conservancy, and Wild Oceans. And I'm speaking to our public comment letter, which we also briefly discussed with the Budget Committee last Friday. We drew upon the NIMS presentation to the CCC meeting in July of the Inflation Reduction Act Climate Ready Fisheries Program, which provides $349 million in funds that have been dedicated for climate ready fisheries to the National Marine Fisheries Service. And of that, NIMS is providing $20 million to the regional fishery management councils to be spent from fiscal year 2023 to 2026. As stated by NIMS, the actions that are funded under the IRA will contribute to the following overarching goals. One is implementation of fishery management measures necessary to advance climate-ready fisheries by improving climate resiliency and responsiveness to climate impacts. And two, development and advancement of climate-related fisheries management planning and implementation efforts in support of underserved communities. We believe the IRA Climate Ready Fisheries Program is a unique and timely opportunity to further achieve the Council's Fishery Ecosystem Plan and CCI goals and objectives. The remaining $329 million is allotted to other buckets, including data modernization, climate and ecosystem science, and Pacific salmon actions. Therefore, we think that focusing on fisheries management rather than science-related projects is the best use of the Council's $20 million in IRA funds. For those funds, we understand that there will be an initial allocation of funds to the councils, and the remainder would be awarded through a competitive process. NIMS provided some examples for the types of council activities that could be funding priorities. And one of the items was operationalizing recommendations from climate scenario planning efforts such as the Council's Climate and Communities Initiative, or the CCI. Therefore, we recommend the Council actively pursue and use the IRA funds to take initial actions to implement the CCI. The organization and planning for the CCI tasks have already been completed at a high level, and we believe the Council is well positioned to compete for the IRA funds. The Climate and Communities Core Team completed its work and presented their final report in September 2021, which was reviewed and commented on by Council advisory bodies. In March 2022, the EWG presented a table in their supplemental EWG Report 2, which is a summary of the CCCT recommendations and an initial prioritization based on the comments the Council received from its advisory bodies and the public in September 2021. And that is the same report that Yvonne just referenced in the EWG report under this agenda item. Of those 14 CCCT recommendations, 8 were deemed to be of high priority, and of those, 5 relate to the Council's current work on FEP Initiative 4. Given that the Council and its advisory bodies are making significant progress on FEP Initiative 4, we recommend that the Council task the EWG and the Ecosystem Advisory Subpanel to coordinate and work with Council staff to develop concrete funding proposals to further completion of the related high priority actions. Other NIMS examples for possible Council proposals relate to operationalizing climate vulnerability assessments, or CVAs, such as we suggested through the groundfish stock assessment prioritization process, and implementing measures that increase the Council's ability to respond to climate change, which could directly relate to actions to improve the Council's process and efficiencies.
Thank you, Michelle. Are there any questions for Ms. Conrad on her report? And I'm not seeing any, so again, thank you very much, Michelle, for joining us this morning. That completes our report and public comment and takes us into council discussion on the fiscal matters. We'll look and see if there are any hands for discussion. Executive Director Burden.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I'll just maybe attempt to recap a couple of things here briefly. So in addition to the routine updates of 2023 budget and how we're doing, which we're doing just fine, and the audit, which we're doing just fine, there were 3 major topics that we brought to the Budget Committee, and we are trying to air some of these more than usual because we are making a few changes, and there are some things that will change our financial status. And so if you do look at the very lengthy presentation that I gave the Budget Committee, and that's in the briefing book, you'll make note of several things that we're planning to do a little bit differently next year to try to keep our deficit within a more manageable amount. And so there are multiple meetings that have been in person that we are planning to send remote. And so that's the bottom line there. The second item is the case of IRA funding. And so that is a case of, well, let's see, NIMS leadership put it this way. They said we're building the plane while flying it. And so the money is available. That's good news. I think it will help us. That's good news. But how all those mechanics will work is still being developed. And so there's an attempt on my and Patricia's part to try to outline as much as we know that's in that Budget Committee report. And we will need to have proposals together by, I believe, late January to secure portions of that 20 million. So that's not much time, but we do have a plan that we've discussed internally and have discussed with the budget committee. I'd be happy to explain more of that to you here if you like. But we believe we have a plan that will incorporate many of the recommendations that you heard from Ms. Conrad and from the EWG about the work that the EWG and EAS have done and that this council has done, and how that connects with many of the activities that the council currently has on our docket. And then the third is the committee of the whole discussion. So we're putting pen to paper and getting some more concrete steps together, milestones together that we plan to turn into an agenda, and we'll bring that back to you in November. So hopefully that's a helpful recap, Mr. Vice Chairman, and I'd be happy to have a discussion or answer any questions about any of that.
Thank you, Executive Director Burden. So are there any comments regarding that? Any questions, discussion? And also at some point, we'd be looking for approval of the Budget Committee report. Corey Ridings.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Merrick, thanks for that overview, and thanks for the clarity and the organization of the budget issues that are facing the council. It's much appreciated. Quick question. You noted that staff is thinking about obviously saving money is important, and how we do that, and thinking about sending some of the committees and meetings remote. Could you share with us a little bit just about how you're going to approach that, and how you've been thinking about deciding which meetings are going to be remote and which will stay in person? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Ms. Ridings. Earlier this year, as staff, we sat down and we developed what I would call some objective ways of proposing which committees to send remote and which not. And so there are, there are, I think, three main factors there. Probably the biggest is the degree to which there's an agenda item on the council's floor that's going to necessitate some, potentially some iteration with the members of that committee. So that stands out as one of the chief reasons why. The second one, of course, is just our budget. The third one's escaping me because it's day last on the council meeting and my brain is full of cobwebs, but that first one really drives much of our thinking. And so what you'll note if you look in the presentation I assembled is that, for example, we're proposing the Habitat Committee go remote multiple meetings. And the Habitat Committee work is very valuable. There are oftentimes agenda items that don't require iteration between the members of that committee and the council. And we think that having them go remote for several meetings would be continue to allow for a productive council environment and would help us with our budget issues. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. Further questions, discussion? Phil Anderson.
One question and a comment, and I think my question's already been answered, but I'm also a little foggy in the brain here this morning. In terms of selecting topics to submit for the IRA pieces, what's the process for doing, or within our council, what's the process for selecting what we are going to request funding for? I know there's a list of potential topic areas that were contained in the budget report. We've got we have at least one public comment about making some suggestions on topic areas that we might put forward. How do we get from here to a point where we're actually proposing something?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Anderson. That is indeed a very important question, and I will caveat my answer by starting with the point that this is still coming into focus, and it's a bit messy. What I have in mind would be first, the council has a year at a glance and an agenda, and we have things that we have to do every year. And I have no intention of allowing a new funding opportunity to blow up what the council's core responsibilities are. And instead, what I would like to do is first start with a crosswalk that says, out of all of the things that we have to do and all of the things we're planning to do, can we integrate any of that into the climate initiatives that have been discussed and prioritized by this council? And our initial review as staff is that there is quite a bit of that can occur. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that's how operationalization, I believe is the term, operationalization of climate information into our management can occur. And I think that's one of the best ways for it to occur. And then as we look further beyond what we currently have on the docket, either through the year at a glance or potentially a little bit further, we have some space that opens up potentially. And so those are where the other priority items that Mr. Rainier and Ms. Conrad flagged, that this council could then say, we want to pursue these. And so that's the discussion I'd want to have in November. Beyond that, there may be an opportunity or even a need to consult with the EWG and EAS to flesh out those ideas a bit more before we submit a proposal. So that doesn't give us many touch points. If that doesn't completely work, NIMS has indicated that if we were to submit a proposal where we don't ask for our full share of the 20 million, that there's likely going to be an opportunity to come back and do this again next year and request the remaining amount. So all that is to say, I think we have a plan. If we can't get all the way there to secure all of the funding that I think is there for us, even though it's fairly competitive, we'll have another cut at this next year. So that's about as clear as I can be at the moment with how new all of this is, but hopefully that's providing some clarity.
And this kind of follow up. And again, this is maybe another one you've already answered. And I think you mentioned what our share of the 20 million is. So would that suggest that we're not in a race with the other councils to get proposals in? It's not a first come, first serve or kind of situation where we will be given a reasonable amount of time to get our proposals in to ensure that we get whatever our, I think it was going to be divided equally, as I recall, but how do we make sure we optimize our opportunity to get our fair share, whatever that is, of those funds?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. So there are, this is where things are also a bit vague. So there are at least two slices to the 20 million pie. The first slice is 3 million, and that will be divided equally among all the councils. And that is for a buildup of staffing or contracting to help manage the remainder. And every council is in the same place on that spot, which is we can't just, as much as we would love to have more money, if it just comes with more work and not more capacity, we can't actually do it. So that first tranche is to give us that capacity. And we have a contractor we've already been talking to that will be helping us with that. The second piece is the competitive piece. And when this word first came out that we would have to competitively bid and compete among our fellow councils, all of the EDs, we all got together and said, we're not doing that. We're in this together. And so we've spoken with Ms. Dennett and others, and we will have to justify our proposal. We have not been told that it will be divided equally, but we have been told that every council will get an amount. In follow-up conversations, I've asked, what if we put a marker down and say, we're not done with our proposal, we plan to come back again. Can you hold some money for us? I haven't been given a guarantee, but I feel good about that prospect. So that's about as much as I can tell you at the moment.
This will be the last, I think. I just wanted to daylight for the council our conversation about the IPHC council representative and funding for that activity, because in the budget committee report or the presentation, I believe, that you gave the budget committee, there was a piece in there where that funding for that activity was going to be discontinued. And I know there was some concern about that voiced, but not only by me, but as well as Heather and Lynn. So the discussion that you and I had was because the Halibut Commission is in the midst of making an important allocation decision relative to how the overall annual CEY is divided up between the various areas. We had a period of stability where they had a 4-year plan. We're in a 50. They've essentially close to roll that over, for at least for us, maintaining the 165. And because of this very important decision that will have multi-year impacts on us, I think our collective argument back to you was that we provide that funding for this year and then revisit it for future years when hopefully that decision will have been made and things are more in the, we're not dealing with a significant policy issue. And it's more kind of back to their annual tasks that are just part of their normal course of business. So that's kind of where we landed in that discussion. I just wanted to daylight that for the rest of the council members if they happen to see that piece in your presentation and had any concerns about that.
Thank you, Phil. Bob Dooley.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Good morning. Question, Merrick. It seems like this competition, so to speak, for this funding is all looking forward. And I'm thinking of a fair start kind of provision here that the councils are all in, the regional councils are in different places. Some have done very little. We have done quite a bit, I think, and, probably one of the lead councils in preparing for this. And those are monies that we have already spent and have affected and really been a contributor to our shortfalls that we're experiencing now in the budget. And are we able to hindcast and recover some of the monies that we've already spent? Acknowledging that other councils are going to be starting from a much lower level and potentially getting reimbursed for those costs, and we would not be if we're just looking ahead. Just a question.
Executive Director Burden.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mr. Dooley. I guess my strong impression from NIF's leadership is that the answer to that is no, that we should continue to look forward. And they have acknowledged that we're all at different places, but that will go into and maybe Mr. Wolf has a response here too, but my understanding is that where we're at in terms of those different places, they'll take that into account as part of the proposal process. So they would expect us to be making more headway than another council that's much further behind, and they won't punish that other council because they're further behind, right? But they also won't backfill our expenses for things that we've done over the last decade. So I hope that is answering your question.
Thank you. Virgil Moore.
I've not paid a lot of attention to this issue in terms of outputs and where we were going relative to funding. I just simply want to say it seems, as I've read through these summary documents, that inland fisheries, salmon-based fisheries, are not well addressed. And specifically, no workshops were held in Idaho. but at least Washington mentions Idaho in their report relative to upriver stocks. But it's not just the Columbia Basin. It would be all effects of climate impacts on inland fisheries and communities, those small communities that are affected by this. And I don't know where it fits in. I know the money is minimal compared to the needs, but I don't want that lost. I just want to speak up for those upriver fisheries, those non-coastal fisheries that occur on those important stocks that we have responsibility for. Thanks.
Thank you, Virgil. Corey Niles.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. On that same topic and the exchange between Phil and Merrick, which was very helpful. I guess one thing in being there as part of the budget committee discussions, and Merrick, the way you frame it is good, but looking at the year at a glance and our core responsibilities, and then these other things, I think just the vision that this council's been working towards is bringing the climate into our core activities to make sure our fisheries are they going to be able to respond to climate change and variability. So eventually they should be one and the same. They're not extra. Climate is not something outside of what we do. It affects us being able to achieve our goals. But so I'd frame it like that's the goal the council has been working to. But to the brass tacks type of thing, you said this is going to come back in November, and just maybe I missed it. And just for clarity for everyone, would that be happening? Where would that be happening in the budget committee arena? I think you got my question, so I'll stop there.
Executive Director Burton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Niles. Yeah, on your first point, I think we're in agreement. That is a good objective, and that's a great way of operationalizing climate information. On the second point, we do continue to plan routing this through the budget committee at the November meeting. But what I also indicated in my comments is that should the council let me back up. The sequencing I have in mind is some staff work between now and the November meeting that we would bring to the budget committee and the council. And from that point, we may then have a need for interaction with the EWG and EAS to continue fleshing out those ideas and topics after the November meeting, which then gets us to a point of being able to submit a proposal by the late January deadline. And so there is the November schedule, but that's not the only point where we would touch with other advisory bodies potentially.
Thank you. Further discussion? Not seeing any. Wondering if there's any motion to approve the report of the budget committee, if so desired. Everybody's thinking. Mr. Gorelnik.
I will give it a go here. Like Phil, I'm a little foggy this morning. And magically, my thoughts appear on the screen. I move the council adopt the recommendations of the budget committee as shown in agenda item H7A Supplemental Budget Committee Report, September 2023.
That looks accurate and complete. Is that so?
Precisely.
Thank you very much. Is there a second? Seconded by Virgil Moore. Speak to your motion as needed.
I think that staff has done an excellent job in preparing the materials for the budget committee and providing the report at our meeting on day 0. And I think that the recommendations set forth a roadmap to moving forward with our 2024 budget, as well as other funding priorities.
Thank you very much. I think that will complete our work here. I do want to add one note of compliments again to the staff, and especially Patricia, her work on the budget materials after having to go through the audit and meeting with the auditors and those meetings and that. We get an extremely clean bill of health. each year and just reflects all the good work that's done. So thank you. So with that discussion, we have a motion on the floor. Is there any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any, I will call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And now, I believe our work is complete, Patricia.
Your work here is complete and we'll come back for November.
All right, thank you. That completes the fiscal matters part of the agenda and takes us to, excuse me, while I bring my screen up here, into item H8, approval of the meeting record, so as not to skip any essential steps. I want to see if anybody wants to offer to read the meeting record into our record. Phil?
It might take me a while to do, but I'd be happy to try. I am hoping that my thoughts have transferred over to Sandra and that my motion will appear here if you're ready for one. I move the council approve the council meeting record as presented in agenda item H8, attachment 1, draft council meeting record, 272nd session of the Pacific Fishery Management Council, June 21 through 27, 2023.
All right, thank you. The language on the screen now is accurate and complete.
Indeed it is.
Thank you. Is there a second? Seconded by Bob Dooley. Speak to your motion as needed.
I don't believe it's needed, but thank you to staff for keeping our meeting record complete. Very much appreciated, and we do use it.
All right, thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Phil. And that completes agenda item H8. And with that, I now pass the gavel back to our chair.
All right. Well, thank you, Vice Chair Hassemer. And we're 30 minutes early already, by golly, so we're make sure we make some flights. Okay, we'll turn to H9, membership appointments, COPs, and Kelly.
Thank you, Chair Pettinger. Council members, good morning. This is agenda item H9, membership appointments and council operating procedures. During this agenda item, the council considers administrative appointment issues regarding the membership roster, as well as relevant changes to the council operating procedures. Relative to council officers, members, and designees, the council received a letter from the Idaho Department of Fish and Game Director, Mr. Jim Fredericks, identifying Ms. Sharon Kiefer as a designee. That's agenda item H9, attachment 1. Additionally, in your supplemental materials, we received a letter from the U.S. Coast Guard, supplemental attachment 4, announcing changes to the U.S. Coast Guard roster. Rear Admiral Charles Foss is now the primary designee, replacing Rear Admiral Melvin Bubalis, who retired. Additionally, during the Budget Committee meeting this week, Chair Pettinger appointed Mr. Mark Gorelnik to the at-large position on the Budget Committee. The chair of the Budget Committee is Vice Chair Pete Hassemer, and the Budget Committee Vice Chair is Mark Gorelnik. For council advisory body appointments for the 2022-2024 term, the council recently solicited nominations for the following vacant positions and received the following nominations. There is one position per each of these announcements. For the Ecosystem Advisory Subpanel, Washington at Large, we received a nomination from Mr. Marcus Min. That's in closed session attachment 1. Additionally, after the briefing book was published, we received a resignation letter from Dr. Terry Klinger, who held one of the Washington at-large positions on the EAS. We thank Dr. Klinger for her work and will be soliciting nominations for her seat after the September council meeting. For the Coastal Pelagic Species Advisory Subpanel, we received 2 nominations for the commercial position on that panel. The first was Mr. Matthew Everingham, which is closed session attachment 2. And the second is Mr. Neil Guglielmo, closed session attachment 3. For the Groundfish Advisory Subpanel, Oregon Charter Boat Operator, we did not receive any applications. We'll go ahead and announce for that again after the September council meeting and see if we can't drum up some applications for your consideration at the November council meeting. For the Groundfish Advisory Subpanel, at large position, we received 5 nominations: Mr. Chris Cooper, Mr. Bill Gunderson, Mr. Doug Eisen, Ms. Heather Mann, and Ms. Sarah Nyani. Those are attachments 4 through 8 in your closed session materials. For the Groundfish Advisory Subpanel, at-sea processor position, we received 2 nominations, one from Mr. Doug Eisen and one from Ms. Sarah Nyani. Those are attachments 9 and 10 in your closed session materials. For Council Advisory Body agency appointments, we received 2 nominations in your supplemental briefing book. The first was for the Groundfish Management Team. The Makah Tribe has nominated Mr. Will Jasper to the tribal position on the GMT, which is closed session supplemental attachment 11. The SSC reviewed the nomination and reported to the council their feedback under closed session. Additionally, for the Salmon Technical Team, the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission has nominated Mr. Brian Van Orman to the tribal position on the STT, the one that is currently held by Ms. Stephanie Thurner, and that is closed session attached supplemental attachment 12. And similarly, the SSC reviewed this nomination and reported to the council under closed session. For ad hoc committees, at its June council meeting, the council established the Klamath River Fall Chinook and Sacramento River Fall Chinook work groups. Summary is found in the June decision summary document. Just wanted to highlight for you that our September briefing book roster highlights the chair's appointments to these work groups to date. Relative to council operating procedures and statement of organization practices and procedures, at your June 2023 meeting, the council adopted a process for considering new or revised groundfish stock definitions. Attachment 2 contains the updates to COP 9, Schedule 1, to reflect this new structure. Additionally, the COP clarifies the council role as it relates to Pacific Whiting Management and the Joint Management Committee. Additionally, management of the commercial directed Pacific halibut fishery transitioned from IPHC to the National Marine Fisheries Service in 2023. Attachment 3 contains updates to COP 9, Schedule 4 to reflect this new structure. Council action under this agenda item, just to recap, appoint a nominee to the Washington at-large position on the EAS, appoint a nominee to the commercial position on the CPSAS, appoint a nominee to the trawl at-large position on the GAP, appoint a nominee to the at-sea processor position on the GAP, appoint a tribal representative to the Groundfish Management Team, appoint a tribal representative to the Salmon Technical Team, direct any necessary action to solicit nominees for the remaining vacancies, and adopt proposed changes to COP 9, Schedules 1 and 4 for groundfish and halibut, respectively. Lots of attachments in your briefing materials, so I won't summarize those. I hit the highlights as I did the situation summary. I'll note there are no supplemental advisory body or management team reports, and I do not see any public comment.
Okay. Kelly, questions for Kelly on the overview? All right. With that, we have council action is before us. And so I guess I'd open up the floor for discussion prior to doing that. If not, we'll go straight to the appointing folks. Okay, let's go with the Washington at-large position on the EAS. Corey Niles.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, excuse me. Have a motion here. I'm ready to go. Okay, I move the council appoint Mr. Marcus Min to the Washington at-large position on the Ecosystem Advisory Subpanel.
All right, Corey, is language accurate?
It is.
Okay. Second by Phil Anderson. Okay. Speak to your motion, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, I think as Ms. Ames said, this position's been vacant for a while, so we're grateful to have Marcus put his name in, this PhD student at University of Washington. We're excited to see the thinking of the university come to the EAS. So, and unfortunately, as Ms. Ames said, Professor Terry Klinger, who's been a member of the group for a long time, has stepped down, and so it looks like we'll be needing to fill another position. But just wanted to thank her as well for the time she has given us in her busy schedule. Thank you.
Okay. Discussion? If not, we'll call for the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstentions? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Corey. With that, we'll go to the commercial position on the CPS-AS. Mark Relic.
Thank you, Chair Pettinger. I move the council appoint Mr. Matthew Everingham to the commercial position on the Coastal Pelagic Species Advisory Subpanel.
Is the language accurate?
Pretty much.
Very good. Second by Bob Dooley. Thank you, Bob. Please speak to your motion.
Yeah, we had two excellent applicants for this position, and could only choose one. And I think that Mr. Everingham will, during the course of his term, will do a good job representing that sector on the CPS-AS.
Very good. Thank you. Discussion. Okay. With that, I'll call for the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Next up will be Trawl at Large on the GAP. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a motion. I move the council appoint Mr. Christopher Cooper to the Trawl at Large position on the Groundfish Advisory Subpanel.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Second by Lynn Mattis. Thank you, Lynn. Please speak to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've had 5 really good applicants to this position to replace the outgoing representative from United Catcher Boats, Ruth Christensen. And I think Chris brings on the water knowledge. He's an on the water fisherman to this process. Really welcome. Had the other 4 were very good applicants as well. But I think this is really the Groundfish Advisory Subpanel really relies on the expertise of actual on the water fishermen to bring that element to us. And I think Chris will do an excellent job. He's a 4th generation fisherman from the Newport area. Family owns 3 trawl vessels, participates in whiting and groundfish. His dad, Mark, was, so he's steeped in many years of history. His dad, Mark, was on the AP in Alaska for years. He began fishing at 12 years old, owns the captain and owner of the fishing vessel Predator. He's both shoreside and whiting cooperatives. He's on the board of the at Sea Whiting Cooperative, mothership at Sea Whiting Cooperative. He participates in cooperative research. I think he really brings an element that we need on the GAP, and I support his appointment.
Thank you, Bob. Discussion? Not say any. Okay, with that, call for the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Bob. Next up will be the at-sea processor position on the gap. Phil Anderson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to make this motion. I move the council appoint Ms. Sarah Nyani to the at-sea processor position on the Groundfish Advisory Subpanel.
All right, language is correct. Have a sit.
It is.
Look for a second. Second by Butch Smith. Thank you, Butch. Please speak to your motion, Bill.
Yeah, we're really fortunate to have such a great group of people that have served on the GAP. Sarah has been on the GAP previously and just did an admirable job in serving on that subpanel. She's got a lot of experience with the council process and has a great deal of knowledge relative to the at-sea fishing sector for the motherships as well as the whiting fishery overall. She's participating in the U.S.-Canada whiting treaty process, and I think we're really fortunate to have someone of her quality be willing to serve on our advisory panel.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Phil. With that, we have the tribal position on the groundfish management team. Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the council appoint Mr. William Jasper to the tribal position on the groundfish management team.
Very good. I see the language is accurate. So
It is, Mr. Chair.
looking for a second. Second by Lynn Mattis. Thank you, Lynn. Please speak to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is to fill the vacant tribal seat on the GMT. William has been employed by the Makah tribe as their groundfish biologist since 2020 and has been attending council meetings. He is responsible for tribal groundfish management and is knowledgeable with the council process, often helping with tribal comments and review of motions on groundfish agenda items. I also note that he's an alumni of the West Coast MREP program. I fully support his appointment to the GMT and expect that he will contribute to the council process and to this tribal seat that I hold in a competent and professional manner.
Thank you, Joe. Any discussion? All right. With that, I'll call for the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstentions? Okay, motion passes unanimously. And with that, we'll go to the tribal position on the salmon technical team. Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the council appoint Mr. Brian Van Orman to the tribal position on the salmon technical team.
Okay, seeing the language is accurate. Second?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Second by Krista Stinson. Thank you, Krista. Please speak to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is to replace Ms. Stephanie Thurner with Brian Van Orman on the tribal seat on the STT. Brian is employed by the Northwest Indian Fish Commission as their coastal anadromous fishery specialist since January of this year and has been attending council meetings assisting the treaty tribes in my role here on the council to address salmon items that are critically important to the tribes. He is responsible for providing support to the co-management activities between the Western Washington Treaty Tribes and the state of Washington on salmon management by advising treaty tribes on fishery management and policy issues. I fully support his appointment to the STT and expect he will contribute to the council process and to this seat in a skilled and professional manner.
Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, call for the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those no. Abstentions? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Look forward to having everyone on board for the next meeting. Kelly, I see. I guess we direct you to get those positions, get those notices out there, right? So, all right, very good. Then Mattis?
I mentioned this during closed session, but I wanted to reiterate that the Oregon Charter representative on the GAP that has been unfilled for a little bit, we will continue to reach out to the industry and see if we can get some nominees for that position. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. All right. And then I guess the next thing is the proposed changes to COP9, schedules 1 and 4, roundfish and halibut. Just before for discussion on that. Or motion. Corey?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think just on COP9, I had my window open. We just, in reviewing it, noticed one small thing I would say and ran it by Mr. Anderson, who is our JMC rep and has to do with the JMC. But I think just in looking at the changes there, they look good. And it appears basically in the schedule wherever March, every time March comes up, that it just there's situations when the JMC can't reach agreement on the TAC, the Pacific Whiting Act, requires the Secretary of Commerce to take into consideration any recommendation this council would make on the TAC, in conjunction with other recommendations from the USJMC and SRG and AP, so I think it says. But so just to be complete, we would recommend that addition be made, just recognizing that this council may want to weigh in on the TAC in those years. Hope if maybe there'll never be any more years where they don't come to agreement, but if they don't, this council could take that opportunity to weigh in.
Okay, thank you, Corey. Duly noted. Does someone have a motion on this one? Kelly, do we need a motion on that one? Or just acknowledgement of changes that were made and what Corey just brought up?
Thank you, Chair Pettinger. We do need a motion to adopt the changes to the COP. I'm fairly clear on what Mr. Niles is recommending for the edits for the groundfish COP changes. I can try to capture that if you'd like. We'd basically add a sentence to that COP that would say something along the lines of, in years in which the JMC is unable to reach agreement, the council may recommend a TAC to NIMS for its consideration in setting the TAC.
Okay. Very good. Do we want a break right now? What's up?
Typing away to a motion, or could I speak, just verbalize it and have Sandra?
I think that'd be fine. Yep. Yeah, verbalize would be fine.
Okay, are you ready, Sandra? I guess I'm going to give it to you orally because I was typing and it wasn't, given my issues with email yesterday, this is probably quicker. I move the council adopt the proposed changes to COP9, schedules 1 and 4 for groundfish and halibut respectively, including updating the language in reference to JMC process in March.
Is the language accurate, Ms. Green?
Yes, it is. Sandra is an excellent typist.
Okay. Look for a second. Seconded by Krista Svensson. please speak to your motion as appropriate.
Thank you. I was just trying to capture the proposed changes and then the JMC issue that Mr. Niles just addressed. So hopefully this allows some leeway for council staff to make that adjustment. I don't think I need to speak to anything else unless I'm directed by council staff to.
The meeting. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Lynn. All right. Discussion on the motion. Oop, Phil.
I would move an amendment to the motion. At the end, remove the period and it would be as follows. So in reference to GMC process in March as follows. In years when the JMC is unable to reach agreement, the council may recommend a TAC, that's TAC, to National Marine Fisheries Service. For its consideration in setting the U.S. TAC.
Is the language on the screen accurate?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Second. Second by Bob Dooley. Thank you, Bob. Okay, please speak to your motion as appropriate. Phil?
It's the purpose of the amendment is simply to make clear what the additional language that would be added to the COP would be, and to formalize that.
All right, very good. Questions for the motion maker or the amendment? Okay, discussion. Oh, Joe Oben.
Yeah, thank you. Just to clarify, I thought you stated, so after the insert, in years when? Did they omit the word in?
I said in years, I don't know if, oh, there. Oh, she just, thanks, Joe.
Then,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to say I'm fully supportive of the amendment and appreciate Mr. Anderson further clarifying what I was trying to get at quickly, but this I think makes it more clear for the record. Appreciate the amendment.
okay, with that, we'll,
Good.
oh, yes, Phil.
The thanks really goes to Corey. So just for the record.
Well, thank you, Corey. And with that, I'll call for the question on the amendment. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstentions? Okay, motion is amended as unanimously. Wonderful. So that takes us to the original amendment. And so looking for discussion if needed. All right, I'll call for the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstentions? Okay. The amended motion passes unanimously. So thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Phil. And I will turn to Kelly, see how we're doing on H9.
Thank you, Chair Pettinger. Council, you have completed your work on H9.
Okay. Well, before we go to H10, we're going to take a break to make sure everybody's checked out, get their stuff lined up to head out of here. So we'll take a 20-minute break and have you back here at 9:30. Okay. Okay, welcome everyone. Well, welcome back. We're at H10, future council meeting agenda and workload planning. And with that, I'm going to turn to Executive Director Merrick Burden. Merrick?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is agenda item H10, which is future council meeting agenda and workload planning. So this agenda item is intended to refine general planning for future council meetings. There's a focus on finalizing our next council meeting agenda, which is November. We also have the preliminary year at a glance for you. And I would just call attention to the fact that we are continuing with our practice of updating that as we go through the week. So you have a supplemental year at a glance and a supplemental November quick reference agenda. So I'll help the council in reviewing these materials, and we can discuss any other matters that are relevant to council meeting agendas and workload. Some of those have come up throughout the week. So certain topics beyond the year at a glance and the quick reference agenda. So the council action here, review pertinent information and provide guidance on potential agenda topics for future council meetings, provide final guidance on the proposed November agenda and plans for future council meetings, and then identify priorities for advisory body workload considerations. And Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions about that overview. Otherwise, what I would intend to do is walk you through the supplemental year at a glance and quick reference agenda before taking advisory body comments.
Okay, questions from Eric on his overview? All right, I'm not seeing any, so, okay.
Okay, just as some orientation here. First, I'll guide you through the supplemental year at a glance. There are a couple of changes that were made since the version that was first in your briefing book. So if we look at November, HMS EFH was shaded. Now it is unshaded since you took action earlier this week. On CPS, we've struck the methodology review. On salmon, the Klamath Work Group progress report has been unshaded. And those are changes from the earlier briefing book version. In March, the only change that's been made since the earlier version is to unshade on the other row, the National Marine Sanctuaries Coral Restoration and Research Plan, the ROA PPA. On April, we've added under salmon a rebuilding plan progress report. Let's see, under June, we've added again the salmon rebuilding plan progress report. We've also unshaded on the other row the sanctuaries coral restoration and research plan. And then in September, one change, we've added the rebuilding plan range of alternatives and PPA. I would also note there was talk yesterday about starting to place the drift gillnet FMP amendment under the HMS item. And there was talk of adding that to September. We had to send these out for circulation prior to that discussion, but we've made note of that already. So those are some things to orient you to on the year at a glance. And I believe that effectively also covers the quick reference agenda. So happy to take questions on those. Otherwise, I would turn us to the advisory body reports.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Questions on his overview? Okay.
So I'll wait till the discussion part. Thank you.
Okay, very good. All right, with that, we'll go to reports, and we'll start off with Dr. Dan Holland and the SSC. Dan, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Chair Pettinger. I am Dan Holland, Chairman of the SSC, and I would like to read into the record agenda item H10A, Supplemental SSC Report 1, September 2023, SSC Committee Report on Future Council Meeting Agenda and Workload Planning. The SSC discussed workload planning and has the following updates to its June 2023 statement under this agenda item. The SSC anticipates conducting its November 2023 and March 2024 meetings in person and the April 2024 meeting remotely. The SSC requests that if the April 2024 SSC meeting is remote, as currently suggested by the Council, the SSC meet Thursday and Friday, April 4th and 5th, to accommodate those members who also participate in Salmon North of Falcon process, as well as those members who have limited access to workspace on the weekends. The SSC ecosystem-based management and groundfish subcommittees will hold a meeting with participation from the ecosystem work group and the ecosystem advisory subpanel to review the proposed risk table approach and 2 pilot risk tables being developed under the new Fisher Ecosystem Plan initiative as a webinar the afternoon of September 21st, 2023. The SSC Coastal Pelagic Species Subcommittee will hold a meeting as a webinar September 22nd, 2023 to review accepted practices guidelines for the CPS stock assessments with participation from CPS management team and the CPS advisory subpanel. The SSC will participate in the groundfish mop-up panel during the week of September 25th through 29th, 2023, with participation from the SSC groundfish subcommittee members, the groundfish management team, and the groundfish advisory subpanel. The SSC recommends holding this as a webinar and expects only 1 day should be needed. The SSC will hold a salmon methodology review October 11th through 12th, 2023 as a webinar with participation from the SSC Salmon Subcommittee, the Salmon Technical Team, and the Model Evaluation Work Group. The SSC Economics and Groundfish Subcommittees recommend holding a follow-up groundfish methodology review of the Stablefish Trip Limit Model on October 12, 2023 in the afternoon as a webinar. This webinar would address comments of the SSC subcommittees from the prior review meeting held May 9th, 2023. Recommendations will be reported to the full SSC at the November 2023 meeting for any final endorsement recommendations to the Council prior to the model being used for harvest specifications analysis. The SSC Economics Subcommittee recommends holding a webinar October 24th, 2023 in the afternoon to review the Stablefish gear switching economic analysis anticipated on the November 2023 Council agenda. The SSC Groundfish Subcommittee proposes holding a stock assessment process review meeting during the week of January 15th through the 19th, 2023. Oh, I'm sorry, that's 2024 as a one-day webinar. Participants in the 2023 assessment process should be included. The SSC Groundfish Subcommittee proposes holding a 2-day meeting to review revisions to the terms of reference and accepted practices documents for the next stock assessment cycle, 2025 to 26, as a webinar to be held during the week of February 5th through 9th, 2024. Members of the SSC will conduct a stock assessment review star panel for the Pacific sardine stock assessment from the February 20 through 22, 2024, from February 20 to 22 in 2024 to be held in La Jolla, California, and chaired by Dr. Andre Punt with participation from the SSC, CPSMT, and CPSAS. The Council Coordination Committee's Scientific Coordination Subcommittee meeting, the SCS8, will be held in New England, be hosted by the New England Fishery Management Council and held the weeks of August 26th, 2024 in Boston, Massachusetts. At least 2 members of the Pacific Fishery Management Council, SSC, are expected to attend. The SSC proposes holding a groundfish methodology review in June of 2024 to consider the use of Fourier transform near-infrared spectrophotometry method for estimating groundfish ages to be utilized in future stock assessments. The SSC recommends participation in the next Stablefish Management Strategy Evaluation Workshop in 2024 at a time and place to be determined, with participation from the SSC Groundfish Subcommittee, the GMT, and the GAP, and possibly the SSC Economic Subcommittee. The SSC proposes holding a workshop to develop alternative harvest control rules for Pacific spiny dogfish in 2024 at a time and place to be determined. That concludes the SSC report. I will note, I just realized there were a couple of places there where dates were 2023 in the statement. It should have been 2024, but we'll get those corrected. Glad to take any questions now.
Okay, Dan. Questions on the SSC report? Vice Chair Hassemer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Holland. Bottom of page 1, the SSC Groundfish Subcommittee proposes holding a stock assessment process review. I apologize. I just saw that and didn't do my background work. Is that a normal end of the year meeting, or is that something new? If it's normal end of the year, I could go back to past years and maybe look at the agenda, but just an idea if that's a regularly occurring meeting and what's discussed.
To the chair, thank you for the question, Vice Chair. I believe that is a regular meeting. I think that is what was used to be referred to as the postmortem.
All right, thank you. That with that name, I understand what it is.
Okay, thank you, Pete. All right, anyone else? All right. Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dan. So
thank you.
Next up will be the GMT report and Whitney Roberts. Whitney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Whitney Roberts, and I'll be reading the Groundfish Management Team report on future council meeting agenda and workload planning. The Groundfish Management Team reviewed the draft agendas and year at a glance for which are attachment 1 and attachment 2, and offers the following for consideration by the Pacific Fishery Management Council. Regarding fall GMT meeting, under the Initiative 4 Ecosystem and Climate Information Progress Report agenda item, the Ecosystem Work Group requested to meet with the GMT before the November 2023 council meeting. In its report on this item, the GMT asked that this meeting be held during the GMT's fall meeting scheduled for October 16 to 20, that should be 2023, and include the Groundfish Advisory Subpanel. Regarding the upcoming November agenda, the GMT appreciates that we are scheduled to start meeting on November 2nd, noting that there are 7 groundfish items, 1 halibut, and 2 to 3 administrative items that the team will be tracking and potentially writing statements for in November. If the council anticipates a particular need for GMT comment on any of the administrative items, the team requests that the council clearly indicate the need to help us balance them with our groundfish workload. In November, the results of several groundfish agenda items are needed for subsequent agenda items. The following GMT requests are intended to ensure the scheduling is consistent with this need and provide sufficient time to complete necessary analyses and reports. Currently, the proposed November agenda in attachment 2 schedules the in-season adjustments agenda item for 1.5 hours on Monday, November 6th. And I'll note here quickly that the GMT, of course, submitted this report into the briefing book before the draft November agenda was subsequently posted yesterday on the 13th. So we do see now that their in-season item is split in 2. But moving on, the GMT recommends scheduling more time for this item given the potential need to adjust trip limits to conserve quillback rockfish for the following year, in other words, 2024, and the need to correct 2024 harvest specification values. Further, the GMT requests this agenda item be split into 2 sessions so that the team could give the council an early indication of potential in-season action items, thereby giving the council the opportunity to help the GMT narrow the scope of analysis necessary to take council action. A 2-part in-season item may also provide an additional avenue for requests under public comment to inform GMT analysis and/or recommendations. This may not be necessary for each council meeting, but the GMT felt it would provide efficiencies in November 2023. I'll also quickly note for the record that the GMT thinks that if the council is interested in using this split approach so that it informs GMT analysis, then there would likely need to be a pathway for the GMT to provide additional reports to the council during that second session. Moving on into the report, similarly, the proposed November agenda item currently schedules exempted fishing permits and biennial management measures on consecutive days, in other words, Monday, November 6 and Tuesday, November 7, to give the GMT adequate time to complete calculations, populate tables, and complete our report. We request EFPs be scheduled earlier than Monday. Allowing that time will facilitate the GMT being able to complete the necessary work and reduce the potential for errors, given that off-the-top deduction amounts impact allocations and shares in all other sectors. With regard to the year at a glance, with several recently assessed stocks likely to be a significant constraint to fisheries in the near future, for example, short spine thorny head and canary rockfish, as well as one stock likely to be declared overfished, it is likely that in-season will require more time in future council meetings. The council should weigh this consideration with other groundfish items when scheduling the year at a glance. Lastly, additional meetings. Members of the GMT will also be participating in a number of ancillary meetings and work sessions outside of council meetings over the next several months, both as members of the GMT and as part of their other duties. A non-comprehensive list is found in Table 1. The GMT will be engaged at the September mop-up panel meeting, even if no assessments go to the mop-up panel, since a rebuilding analysis for quillback rockfish off California will be reviewed. The GMT noted that the Nature Conservancy is hosting the Initiative for Ecosystem and Climate Information Workshop in early 2024. If the council or TNC anticipates or wants GMT participation at this workshop, the GMT can only accommodate the alternate dates proposed, in other words, February 13 through 14, 2024. And as I said, Table 1 below provides that non-comprehensive list of meetings and workshops that the GMT expects, and I won't go through those in detail, but I am happy to answer any questions about our report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Whitney. Questions on the GMT report? Lynn Mattis.
Thank you, Chair Pettinger. I have two sort of related questions for the GMT. And Whitney, this concerns the new November agenda that you may or may not have seen. EFPs have been moved to Sunday, so that gives like 48 hours before harvest specifications completes. So that moves it a day earlier. Would that work better for the GMT than having it on Monday as originally scheduled?
Through the chair, thank you, Ms. Mattis, for the question. I do believe that would give the team sufficient time to populate our tables and make sure that all of our numbers are correct. Just noting that that capacity may depend on what other analysis and tasks overlap with that 48-hour time period. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Whitney. That does. And then the second one has to do with the split in season. On the supplemental 4, the first in season is scheduled for Monday with the second in season on Wednesday. If there was a possibility of us moving that first in season to even earlier in the week, would that be beneficial to the team to give you all a little more time in between the two in seasons?
Through the chair, thank you, Ms. Mattis, for the question. Yes, I do believe that it would be ideal for the team if the first session for in-season was scheduled earlier in the week, given that if it's the council's intent to use that two-session approach to help inform the GMT and maybe narrow the scope of our analysis and get us on the right track, there would be presumably some analysis needed between that first session and that second session, as well as additional reports that we'll need to write. So I'm not sure the way that it's shown in current attachment 4 is enough time between those two sessions, and it would be helpful for the team if we could get that first session scheduled earlier in the week. So thank you for that question.
Thank you for the information. Thank you, Chair. I'm done.
Thank you, Lynn. Anyone else? All right. Thank you, Whitney. All right. Next up will be the EWG report and Yvonne DuRenay. Yvonne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be reading from agenda item H10A, Supplemental Ecosystem Work Group Report 1. We discussed this agenda item at our September 5th webinar meeting. We reviewed the proposed ecosystem management agenda items on the council's year-at-a-glance summary, preliminary, and support moving those forward as unshaded future agenda items for March and September 2024. We also discussed the effectiveness of continuing our past practice of supplying the council with its list of follow-up tasks from the Climate and Communities Initiative as part of this workload planning agenda item. Our sense is that considering and prioritizing work on the CCI follow-up tasks requires more detailed and focused discussion time than is commonly available during the workload planning agenda item. Therefore, we are recommending that the council add an agenda item to its March 2024 meeting to review and prioritize follow-up tasks from the Climate and Communities Initiative. And we reiterate our recommendations in those bullet points. The list of Climate and Communities Initiative follow-up tasks updated through September 2023 is provided in our supplemental report for agenda item H7 in support of the council's discussions of the Inflation Reduction Act funds. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Questions for Yvonne on the EWG report? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Thank you, Yvonne. Next, we go to the GAP report and Susan Chambers. Susan.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Susan Chambers, for the record, and chair of the GAP, and I will be reading into the record our Groundfish Advisory Panel report on future council meeting agenda and workload planning statement. Regarding the November 2023 agenda, we reference the draft agenda and suggest 1, splitting F7 in-season adjustments into 2 parts. This would provide the opportunity for the GAP and GMT to receive council guidance to better inform our ongoing discussions during the week. Additionally, this would provide more public transparency for those interested in the agenda item, since the council will be considering actions that may modify some or all of the 2024 fishing seasons. The council has done this for in-season action in the past. And I'll just note that we did not see the second version of the November agenda yet. So this has already, been addressed in some respect. Number 2, split the I-1 Pacific Halibut Catch Sharing Plan into 2 parts. This would enable the advisory bodies to provide comments and the council to take public comments prior to council action. This would allow council members the time to fully digest the reports and public comments and devise motions for a quick final action discussion on the council floor. Number 3, convening a GAP webinar immediately prior to the November in-person meeting to cover items such as halibut catch sharing plan, which is an item of great importance to the GAP and could be helpful if the council chooses to split the halibut item for the council agenda. The 2025 to 2026 harvest specifications and management measures, and possibly some administrative items. These webinars facilitate the development of timely, comprehensive GAP reports. Regarding a closed area workshop, the GAP continues to recommend the council schedule a scientific and statistical committee groundfish subcommittee workshop to analyze potential closed area data gathering of large spatial closures. The GAP suggests conducting this workshop as soon as possible in order to have the workshop results in time to be incorporated into the next stock assessment cycle. For reference, see the SSC's March 2023 Groundfish Subcommittee Report 1. We also recommended this in our April 2023 GAP Report 1 and June 2023 GAP Report 1 on future workload planning. We cannot emphasize enough the importance of obtaining information on the stocks in these areas that could inform future stock assessment. Mr. Chair, that concludes our GAP statement, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Susan. Questions on the GAP report? Okay, seeing that. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you.
Next up will be Gway Kirshner in the EAS report. Gway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the council. For the record, my name is Gway Kirchner. I'm the co-chair of the Ecosystem Advisory Subpanel, and I'll be reading to you today from agenda item H10A Supplemental EAS Report 1. The Ecosystem Advisory Subpanel discussed the Pacific Fishery Management Council's future agenda planning and related EAS agenda and workload planning items and has the following comments. The EAS is looking forward to meeting in person in March 2024 and would like to reiterate that we would appreciate meeting for 2 days, as it's not possible to complete our work in a one-day meeting when focusing on the ecosystem status report and the Fishery Ecosystem Plan Initiative 4. The EAS finds in-person meetings far more effective than virtual meetings to reach an informed consensus. The EAS reviewed the Ecosystem Workgroup report and would like to offer support of their recommendation to create a standalone ecosystem agenda item to discuss the follow-up of recommendations from the Climate and Communities Initiative. This will allow greater focus on remaining recommendations and provide a concise suite of projects that can inform funding opportunities, such as those available from the Inflation Reduction Act. Lastly, the EAS was encouraged by funds dedicated from the IRA that specifically address climate-ready fisheries. We note that the current ecosystem and climate issues fit well within the vision for these funds, and the council is well poised to be competitive for additional IRA funds. In particular, these funds could support opportunities for increased Pacific Council focus on environmental drivers, fisheries, and fishing communities within the realm of climate change. Thank you, and I can take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Gway. Questions for Gway on the EAS report? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Gway. Next up will be the HMS management team and Amber Rhodes. Amber.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Welcome.
Great, thank you. Hello, I am Amber Rhodes, providing the statement of the HMSMT on this agenda item. The team discussed the year at the glance at the draft proposed council meeting agenda for the November 2023 meeting. And we offer the following recommendations shown in table 1 at the bottom of our report. These include, for the November agenda, unshade final action for HMS EFH, or Essential Fish Habitat, and for the March 2024 agenda, add a shaded OPA stock considerations item. Additionally, the MT requests the council schedule its ecosystem agenda items near the end of council meetings to give all advisory bodies equitable access to providing input. For example, the September 2023 briefing book posted after the team had held its webinar to prepare for this meeting, and the ecosystem agenda item was scheduled for the morning of the first day of the team's meeting here. Therefore, we did not have the opportunity to review and discuss the EWG's work as a team or write a report before the agenda item occurred. And that concludes my statement.
Okay, thank you, Amber. Questions for Amber on the HMS management team report? John Ugritz.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Amber, for the report. I note that the team has OPA requested for March of 2024. And based on the discussion we had yesterday and some of the feelings around the table, I'm wondering, is the team pushing to start this sooner than later? Or, if we wanted to wait for a later date, just based on workload and other issues, would that be okay with the management team?
Thank you, Mr. Ugritz, for the question. The team didn't feel strongly about where to put OPA on the YAG. Really, it would be helpful to delay it until after the next spec cycle. We were just seeing March as the best spot on the current YAG.
Thanks, Amber. So after specs would be like possibly even a year after that, like March of 25?
Yes, correct. Specs wraps up in March of 25.
Okay, thank you, John. Any further questions for the management team? All right. Well, thank you, Amber. Next up will be the HMS advisory subpanel and Mike Conroy. Mike. Mike, are you there? Okay, sure. Kelly, read it in.
Sure.
Kelly? I don't see Mike there. Could you read that into the record? Or Kit could. I didn't see you back there, Kit. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Kit Dahl, I'll read the HMSAS report on behalf of the subpanel. HMSAS reviewed the draft proposed Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting agenda for November and the workload planning preliminary year-at-a-glance summary. During your March 2023 meeting, the HMSAS did not attend in person, given the number of important international management activities which are slated to be discussed next year and preparations for any HMS roadmap workshop to be held in conjunction with the June 2024 council meeting. We recommend that the HMSAS and management team meet in person during your March 2024 meeting.
Okay, thanks, Kit. Questions for Kit on the advisor subpanel report? I don't see any. Thanks, Kit. That takes care of our management teams and our advisory bodies. Do public comment? 0? Really? Okay. That takes us back to you, Merrick.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's see. Thanks all advisory bodies for your comment. Just to help orient your discussion, I'll walk through in a little more detail what it is we're talking about, and might take the opportunity to reference a couple of the comments I've heard so far. So if we start at the preliminary year-at-a-glance summary, looking at November, we are scheduled right now for 5.7 days. So that is quite a full agenda. We have a couple of relatively light items on CPS. On groundfish, we are getting quickly into our specifications, the meaty part of our specifications process. So there's quite a bit there. Also in season is proving to be quite a challenge here, as indicated by this week. So there's been talk of having a 2-part schedule for that topic. We also have what we're calling phase 2 stock definitions. I would argue the important part here concerns our nearshore complexes, many of our complexes and the component species, and reconstituting those. There's also talk of federal versus state jurisdiction as part of that topic. And then we have gear switching. So that, of course, is a large topic, and we're looking for a PPA there to stay on schedule. HMS, we come back for a final preferred alternative on EFH. And we're also starting to talk about the HMS roadmap concept. We talked about, at the last meeting, we talked about a workshop that was essentially linked to the phase out of the drift gillnet fishery. And the way I read that workshop is trying to chart a course for the future of that fishery and what this council wants to do. We also have, this is the last meeting in advance of the WCPFC meeting that meets in December. So there's an international management item there. Salmon, we're coming back after our summer and fall methodology review topics. So you see the methodology review there. We have final action on FMP Amendment 24. We also have stock status determinations, and we hear the first report from our newly established Klamath Fall work group. Pacific Halibut, we go 2024 catch sharing plan final. And we have a smattering of other items. And then as we work through the spring, of course, those are large salmon matters because we are in the specs season, if you will. Groundfish is also quite heavy there. We're looking for a sablefish gear switching final in March. We also have in March our meeting of the ecosystem groups. We hear of the California Current Ecosystem Status Report and Science Review. We have FEP Initiative 4, and there was some talk from our ecosystem groups about some CCI recommendations being added to March. We also have some items on halibut, and we come back for the sanctuary's coral matter and are looking for a PPA. We're currently at 5.8 days. That is well over our target. So some trimming to do there at some point. April, of course, is another salmon heavy meeting. We have several groundfish matters there. June, already scheduled to be a heavy meeting. Smattering of groundfish matters. We come in for fixed gear marking and entanglement risk reduction. We're looking for an FPA there. Our limited entry fixed gear follow-on actions, looking for a PPA. We're tentatively scheduling the trawl catch share program cost project and the review process for that meeting. And then continuing on, we have a few other items that are shaded here on salmon, on halibut, and a few other matters. And then stretching out into September, we start to get a little bit more time on the agenda, at least at the moment. Every meeting is a groundfish meeting. So we're looking for a final preferred alternative on limited entry fixed gear, follow-on actions. We're looking at scoping for our phase 2 stock definitions. Moving down through salmon, we have our, I've neglected to make note of the rebuilding plans that we will need to be addressing here on salmon. That's, I believe that's particularly to spring, summer, queets, Chinook. And a few other matters. Of course, there's almost always marine planning. Let's see, moving over to the quick reference agenda, walking through this quickly just to orient you. So we do have a few meetings already scheduled in advance of the council meeting. So that's to the far left under the acronyms title. That's a new addition that we've made. We also have the first ever in-person meeting of the MPC scheduled for November. We tentatively have an SSC groundfish subcommittee meeting to tackle some topics related to our specifications. And we have a online meeting scheduled of the SAS at that time. Thursday, we have several other advisory bodies beginning to meet, the GAP and GMT in person, and all the other groups there, the SSC, Legislative Committee, Budget Committee, and Enforcement consultants all meeting in person. Starting off on Friday, after getting through some routine matters, we would turn to salmon. I have a few matters there as already flagged in the YAG. On Saturday, we move over to coastal pelagic species, a few light matters there, and then begin groundfish. This would be a fairly heavy groundfish day. The rebuilding analysis and stock assessment topic may take some time if our earlier discussions from 2 days ago are any indication, and I can get into more of that and where we are with that matter at the appropriate time. And then we would turn to sablefish gear switching. Allowing 4 hours for that is actually a compressed amount of time in terms of our internal discussions about what we might need to do there. So that would be a very full day. In reality, we may need to spill some of our sablefish gear switching public comments over at a Sunday, depending on how that goes. Looking at Sunday, the habitat matter is shaded. I think I flagged this earlier. We don't see items at the moment that would require council action. So, you know, the Habitat Committee reports are always quite informative and helpful, but we would be looking for habitat comments under things like EFH rather than a standalone habitat item potentially. We then have several HMS items, including FBA on EFH. And we have our first discussion of the HMS roadmap workshop objectives, and then groundfish specifications and EFPs. Then moving over to Monday, of course, there's marine planning, which we have most meetings. Beginning our conversations around stock definitions, our first check-in of in-season. And there was note during our discussion here a second ago, or questions with the GMT, there was questions about the potential to move that earlier on the schedule. Pacific Halibut. And moving on Tuesday, we've scheduled Fiscal Matters for Tuesday. We anticipate more of a discussion there that would be amenable to something other than the last day, and that is because of the number of topics we have on IRA funding, the committee of the whole planning, and some other topics that will take a bit of time. And then, of course, some other groundfish matters that continue on from earlier days. And then we get into the last day, come back for in-season, and then take up our usual administrative matters. So it is a slightly, this agenda has taken some creative thinking. I'll just put it that way. How about I stop there, Mr. Chairman, and happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, yeah, time for discussion.
Okay, questions from Eric on that?
Is this on both the year at a glance and the November, or just the November?
I'm happy to take any questions on either.
Just on the year at a glance, looking at March, the shaded whiting treaty implementation item. And I understand that March is already over 5.5 days. So were you thinking about us reporting out as an informational report? The JMC will be meeting prior to the March meeting, and we will, well, we'll know whether we have an agreement or not, and if we do, what it is. And then just reflecting back on our addition to the COP that we did in the event that there is an agreement, is not agreement. This would be our only time to offer any perspectives to National Marine Fisheries Service prior to the Secretary setting the U.S. TAC. So just don't need to necessarily resolve it right now, but just flagging that.
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Anderson. Noted. Yep.
Lynn?
Well, thank you, Chair. Since we're in March on the year at a glance, the EAS did request a 2-day meeting, if at all possible. Don't know what the hotel space is going to be like, but just wanted to flag that and remind us of that request from the EAS. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Mattis. I don't know if I can't recall exactly what our schedule is at the moment. I know we've had several conversations with the EAS and EWG about meeting a couple of days rather than one day. I believe we've cooked that into our booking plans. I think that's where we're at, but I don't have that right in front of me.
John?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Looking at the year at a glance and thinking back, Merrick, to a couple things you said when you first brought it up. For HMS, I think when I mentioned the Drift Gillnet FMP start, I was thinking November 2024, which obviously is not yet on the year at a glance, but I'd be okay with that. And then just now, when the management team mentioned adding OPA to March of 24, I think I'd prefer to wait. I think they've got a lot on their plate with specs coming up, and that we could wait for OPA to come back a year later in 25. And then finally, and this may take a little more discussion, but I believe this week the council took action to move forward with Cordell Conservation Area revisions. And the thought was that those would be discussed along with the National Marine Sanctuary's coral restoration and research plans. And I don't see that on the YAG at all. So kind of flagging it, but it could be under those items or somewhere else if staff feels that it's better suited for different timing.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ugoretz. I've made note of your two HMS comments. Thank you. Could I turn to you, Kelly, and ask you to summarize where we're at in terms of the integration of the Cordell Banks and the Sanctuary's Coral Plan?
Thank you, Mr. Ugoretz, Director Burden. Council and NIMS staff need to regroup and have a scoping meeting to understand the scope of what was done under the Coral Research and Restoration, as well as the Cordell Bank, to understand whether it is possible to put those items together on the time frame that is needed to make the sanctuary's deadline.
Okay. Anyone else? Mark Grolick.
Thank you, Chair Pettinger. Just looking at the proposed November agenda, we have on Wednesday, November 1, we have the MPC meeting at the same time as the SAS, but the SAS has a representative, as I recall, on the MPC. So that may create a conflict. And also, we have, at least for the moment, a legislative committee scheduled for Thursday, November 2nd, and maybe we should discuss whether that is necessary or not.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Grelnick. We've had some conversations internally about whether we could get some of our salmon meetings, including the SAS, to meet even earlier than Wednesday. So I would aim for that to avoid that conflict that you pointed out. In terms of the legislative committee, I did send around some updates from Mr. Dave Whaley regarding some bills that are intended to be introduced over the next few weeks. I realize we haven't discussed them here. I would expect there may be some fodder for the legislative committee in November.
Right.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at the November agenda, since we're on that now. Couple things to note. We have, at least in recent past, had our regional administrator come and brief the council kind of on our annual priorities process at the November meeting. Our new regional administrator, Jen Kwan, will be available the morning of Friday. So I think we've kind of fit that in to be open comment before, and happy to do that as well. But just letting the council know she will be available that Friday morning. She has to go out of town starting that afternoon, but she will be available that Friday morning and can do it under B1. A small but important change we'd like to propose on the salmon items. As the council is aware, we've been working with the California Department of Fish, Wildlife and Industry to develop a new management framework using landing limits to management within pre-season Chinook catch projections in California salmon fisheries, which should result in fisheries staying below the take limits on California coastal Chinook, which has been a problem in recent years. We provided a number of reports to the council on this topic starting last November, and the framework will be finalized prior to this November council meeting, and we do anticipate using it in 2024. So what we'd like to do is actually, I think we could just keep the agenda items as is. We would extend D4 to an hour so that we can have a presentation on the framework and the council can be briefed ahead of the preseason planning. And in order to allow that, we would propose reducing D2 to just a half an hour. I think that topic on final language, and given the September discussion here and the direction on that issue, I think that'll be relatively straightforward and shouldn't take the full hour allotted. So just really just a switch in the timing there, I think would be helpful. And then lastly, I'm kind of at the council's discretion on this, but With PFMC happening in December, and we had a number of discussions already on that, recommendations at this meeting. We will not have any additional updates on ITGC or some of the other international bodies by November. So it's really up to the council. I'm not sure H2 will be needed, but I think it is in our COP. So at the very least, I think you could have saved 30 minutes there if you needed some extra time on that Sunday. But we'd also be okay if it's removed. And that's it for NIMS. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Corey Ridings.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm back looking at the YAG and conferring with my co-chair here to my right, recommending an EEJ update for next March or April. This will be an opportunity to report back on EEJC member meetings with NIMS on the RIP, which will be happening over the winter. Progress by council staff on items moved forward earlier this week. Give NIMS an opportunity to give an update if they've got one at that point on the RIP. And finally, the staff member, Dr. Seeger, will be retiring around this time. So wanted to put this on the agenda before he departs.
Thanks, Corey. John?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I wanted to come back to the November agenda. I'm looking at coastal pelagic species in November. It's pretty light. And what I see are items that could either be handled in the April meeting or combined later on. And so what I'm thinking in terms of council efficiencies and knowing that groundfish is going to be a beast in November, we might just want to skip CPS this November. And EFPs are all rollovers. They could be, out there for public review prior to April. The stock assessment best practices, we're not anticipating anything radical from the SSC. It's not a required council action item. So my proposal would be simply cancel E in November.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ugaretz. Couple of thoughts on that. So one is we did have a discussion back in June about NIPS reporting back to us on the stock structure question. What else may be done from the Science Center to help advance that topic? So if we were to cancel that, we would look to just move that to a later meeting. There is the matter of EFPs. So if we were to cancel that, we would just look for your nod for us to go ahead and put those out for public review without them coming to the council. And then there's the matter of stock assessment best practices. So we would be, if this didn't come back to the council, it would just come directly from the SSC to the center. So I'm not opposed to your proposal. This is how we would proceed if that were to be the consensus of the council.
Yeah, thanks. And through the chair. Yeah, I think that all sounds reasonable, given what we expect with all of these things. I think if we got a new EFP proposal, which we're not anticipating, that could throw a wrinkle in things, but these are all rollovers. So I'd be happy with that. And I'd be happy with the SSC best practices going direct.
Thanks, John. Phil?
Yeah, appreciate that suggestion because not only does groundfish look like a beast, the whole meeting looks like a beast to me. Trying to figure out how we're going to get all this done in 5.5 days. So there's lots of potential for slippage in some of the time estimates. So I'm speaking in support of John's suggestion, and to a more minor point on Friday on D3, the methodology review final 2 hours. 2 hours seemed a little heavy to me for what I would anticipate needs to be done, but staff could talk about it, and maybe there may be a good reason for 2 hours being there, maybe from past experience, but I'm just looking for anything here that where we can free up a little bit of time here to make this a more manageable meeting.
Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Anderson. So assuming this is the consensus of the council, dropping this would allow us to, and I'm not going to propose reorienting all this on the fly, but it would allow us to start stretching out these groundfish matters so we can work through them more systematically and hopefully get through in season before day last. That gives me a lot of heartburn. So that would be my intention, that we would start to just stretch that out so we can work through them more systematically, if that makes sense.
Okay. Heather?
Well, thank you, Chair Pettinger. I think Ms. Mattis and I are probably headed in the same direction, but appreciate the suggestion from Mr. Ugeritz on CPS. And we spent quite a bit of time in our morning delegation meeting looking at this November agenda and thinking about how that's going to look in reality. So especially after this meeting, with a lot of the hard issues this meeting being FPA and then being PPA in November. So also was doing a bit of Jenga with some of the GMT's suggestions and the agenda, thinking of space for that, and appreciate that you'll work on it. I also had some ideas of how things might move to accommodate the GMT's request to split halibut into 2 agenda items. And just thinking about all the public comment on that, and if that were a possibility, if I can share what I was thinking and leave it to you to find the best place for everything. But if CPS were not on the agenda for November, and in season number 1 was moved to that position on Saturday morning, and then if Fiscal Matters was moved to Monday, where in season number 1 was, then at least what my brain is seeing is that would allow space to divide halibut into number 1 on Monday and number 2 on Tuesday. And I realize it doesn't leave a lot of work for analysis, but it does give us the opportunity to hear the overview, advisory body reports and comments, and then a break between the 2. So just thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Lynn?
Thank you, Vice Chair Pettinger. What she said.
Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just reflecting on the week that we've had and reoccurring issue of getting reports to in the briefing book the day that we're addressing that agenda item, and some conversations I've had with several people on the Gap, and looking at the juggling here that we may be moving up some groundfish issues. I think it might be good to think about giving the Gap some more time earlier to get together, maybe another day or something to be able to do their work. Because when we talk about time, a lot of the time are late reports that we don't see until hour, or maybe even sometimes even when it's on the floor. And so it requires them to read them verbatim into the record. And for our knowledge, it's not fair to us to have to make a decision without contemplating the input. I mean, ideally, we would have these at a minimum the night before the reports. But GMT had the similar issue. I mean, they're burning the candle pretty hard there to get our reports, and we still get them late. And so I think that's a problem. And I think ultimately it's a time savings if we can address it, because it gets, at least from my perspective, it gets us the ability to read reports, reach out to the people who generated those reports in the committees and talk to them and understand the points of view before we're forced to make decisions on the fly. So I think it saves time, saves council discussion potentially to do that. But I hope we could consider that maybe polling the management teams and advisory panels and weigh in on whether they think they have enough time to produce the reports early so that we have the ability to really digest them before we get them on the floor. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Eric?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Dooley. And you and I have had these conversations a few times now, and I think there's a lot of logic in that. And I agree with, I think, everything you've said. It is a logistical dance. We have our hotel contracts that we sign. We aim to sign them about 2 years in advance. We can ask the hotel if there's extra space. We can try to do that. What we would want to do, though, is not make sure we're just extending everyone's stay and inflating our budget. So what we're starting to do is talking about decoupling a bit the overlap between our advisory bodies and the council, and starting the advisory bodies earlier and having the council run later than them. And there are some advantages to having that overlap too, because you can have those hallway discussions. So I guess as your director, I'm in agreement with you, but there are lots of things to consider to make that happen.
So Kelly?
Through the chair, Mr. Dooley, just a note here that Jesse, Todd, and I have already been talking about workload flow and delivery and timing of GAP and GMT statements, and we've got some ideas moving forward so we can try to facilitate an easier process in November.
Yeah, thank you. That's encouraging. Thank you so much, Kelly, the chair. I really appreciate the comment of the overlap, that it's extremely valuable for us to have, the conversations and the relationships with our advisory panels and management teams. So I would not be in favor of decoupling totally. I think that overlap is important. This is more in the anticipation of where things are on the agenda. As meaty as, if we eliminate CPS, as meaty as that day will become, it seems like our groundfish management team and the groundfish advisory panel are going to be stressed to get those reports out to us. Thus, it costs us time and lack of information and be fully informed to make decisions. So anyhow, that's I'll leave it there. But I am encouraged by the fact that you're all addressing it. So thanks.
Okay, Len?
I appreciate the need and the desire for statements as early as possible, but as a recent former GMT member, late stuff happens. The goal is to try to get stuff into the secretariat by 4 p.m. the day before something is on the agenda. When something gets dropped in the GMT's lap at 2:30 that afternoon, making 4 o'clock isn't possible. And I'm really sticking up for my staff right now because of how hard they worked. They try. And the goal is to have things, but with complicated issues comes complicated discussions and complicated analysis, which takes time. So I think given they need a little leeway that sometimes they're not going to make those deadlines. They do their absolute best to do it. But sometimes they just can't be made due to the complications. I know they desire to make those deadlines. This week, that with the end season, it just wasn't possible. But I know they're working on it. I just want to give them some leeway, given everything they have to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a thought on that. I really do appreciate the comments that Lynn made just now. I think maybe I misinterpreted this a little bit, that it seems to me that when we get, particularly from the GAP and the GMT, reports that cover several different topics, but one is one part of their report is what's the sticking point. Perhaps we could decouple that and issue a main report early that they had the work they have done, and with the full understanding that to be delivered at a later time, the second part, so a supplemental report, so to speak, so that we just get the information that we need to know earlier to be able to work through those and understand how progress. But I do understand how things sometimes pop up late, and they're doing their best to get it done. In fact, more than their best, we're asking a lot of them sometimes to do that. So thank you.
Okay. Corey Ridings.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to ask a quick question before I go here. Are we just talking about November now? Or are we still opening the conversation to the YAG?
I'm happy to take feedback on either or more than that. Yeah.
Great. We're mixing and matching. I just wanted to recommend following on the EWG request and the EAS request to add an ecosystem agenda item in March of next year, review and prioritize follow-up tasks from the CCI. Given that the EWG will be meeting, they do that twice a year, I think it's a good time to add that and keep that conversation going. So.
Thank you, Ms. Ridings. I've also made note of that. What you'll also see at the bottom there is that we are at 5.8 days. And so we would be needing to start to trim some things down. Do you have any thoughts on what we might trim?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Director Burden, for putting me on the spot there. No, I don't. Was not prepared to speak to that. I think for now, given it's 2 meetings away, it's probably a good idea to add it in. If we want to shade it, just keep it on the radar and see how those meetings comes forward. There's probably going to be some overlap with that content and the ongoing conversations about the incoming pots of money from NIMS and the grants. And I know that you spoke earlier to some of that still getting ironed out. So I would suggest probably just put in a shaded or keep it on there as best as you see fit. Thanks.
Okay. Mark?
Thank you, Chair Pettinger. I notice on the November agenda, we have on November 1st, a tentative meeting of the SSE Groundfish Subcommittee. And I guess my first question is that related to the discussion we had with regard to the Quillback assessment?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mr. Grelnick. I think this would probably be a good opportunity just to step back and reflect on that particular question. So we've had quite a few conversations as staff about that item, and then met with the GMT Alumni Trust the other night, as I indicated. And at this point, we've been able to also have conversations with the Science Center and the region. And so we have a plan moving forward. And so the Science Center has indicated they will attempt to run the second analysis on Quillback using the updated catch data that CDFW has provided. And as staff, we will be looking at the historical record of the council and our perspectives on data moderate stocks. And then the there will be a few more steps. So one is the mop up, which occurs late this month. And then we have this groundfish subcommittee meeting. So all of that is related to the quillback question. And I'm drawing a little bit of a blank about what exactly is on the docket for that subcommittee meeting. And I'll look at Kelly to see if she can fill in that blank for me. But the short answer is yes. But I also wanted to provide some context that we do have some stones falling into place about who's going to do what, how we're going to proceed. And you should expect some additional information in November.
Mark?
That's great. I guess part of the discussion we had was about the model's ability, the ground truthing the model. Is it reflecting, is it predicting that which we see? For example, from the CDFW report suggesting just extraordinary removals, which doesn't seem possible. I'm just wondering, is that also going to be folded into the discussion that will be undertaken at the Science Center and the Groundfish subcommittee of the SSC to sort of try to come up with a model that's internally and externally consistent?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Grelnick. I'm hesitating to specify the details because we haven't figured all that out yet. We have an assessment that's in front of us that's been blessed as BSIA, which is a really large issue. And what we do after that, if anything, is not clear. And so that's one issue. The others are, then if we have this assessment, how do we use it and how can we use it? And do we actually have options? And so that's another issue that we need to noodle on. We did talk about spending some time in a better communications effort to have an exchange about how the assessment works. Maybe I'll just turn to Kelly and see if she can help me here with some of the details about what we are discussing and considering to help flesh this issue out in more detail by November.
Thanks, Director Burden. Mr. Grelnick, yes, Merrick characterized things correctly. We had some great discussions with the center about bringing back information to the council on the questions that they raised under the agenda items here at this meeting. One part of their suggestions was to also bring forward some information that demonstrates what happens when you go from a data moderate assessment to a full assessment and the performance. We have a great example here with copper rockfish in California this cycle that could be used to kind of demonstrate the robustness of the data moderate approach and how it may translate into a full assessment. They are, at the risk of speaking for the center, but we had a great discussion with them and they heard the questions the council has raised, and I believe they'll be prepared to address those when we come into November.
Thanks, Kelly. Mark?
And just to conclude, in the outcome, we'll get a report from that subcommittee during the meeting. We'll have floor discussion during in season, I assume.
Merrick?
Getting all tongue twisted, I guess the cobwebs are still here. Typically, a groundfish subcommittee report is appended to a full SSC report. And so the matters of quillback would come up under, let's see, not in season, but F2, I believe, is where it would come up. So you would hear a report from that committee through the full SSC report.
Okay. Anyone else? Heather?
Thank you, Chair Pettinger. And also, if there's more conversation on this topic, I'm fine with that. But if not, I did want to step back a little bit to CPS and just, Merrick, you mentioned that bringing back the Science Center report on sardine stock structure. And I know we've talked in the past about having a place on the council's agenda to discuss CPS science needs in general, and thought maybe that would also be a place where that issue could fit. So just flagging that on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Lynn.
Thank you, Chair. We sort of got sidetracked on around, but I was going to mention that I reached out to John North, who is normally in the CPS seat for ODFW, as well as our MT person, and they were both supportive of the proposal. They didn't see an issue with that. I don't know if that support is needed, but I did want to say I'd reached out and they were okay with it.
Oh, always good to get it. Okay. Merrick?
Yeah, thank you. I guess what I'm hearing is quite a bit of support for dropping CPS from November. I've made note of how we would handle those items, and I would then bring back, to your point, Ms. Hall, I would intend to bring back I like the idea of a CPS science needs. I'm trying to create a more organized way of working through CPS. I like that, and have a stock structure discussion there. That dropping that really helps our November agenda. I'll just put it that way. I think we all know that. And so what we would try to do is stretch out groundfish a bit more through November, and hopefully that allows for timely production of reports and consideration of topics, and eliminates these choke points that we were experiencing here. So that's what I'm looking at for November. And then I made note of a couple of other matters. So Mr. Wolf, thank you for flagging the NIMS perspectives on these. I think we can handle everything that you flagged without a problem. And then we will try to, like I said, on groundfish, we'll try to stretch those out. There were some comments about moving in season, stretching that apart a little bit more. And then Pacific halibut, I'm inclined to say I think 2 days could be accommodated. I don't know, Kelly, if you have any thoughts about that in particular, but I think that is doable. I won't sit here and try to reorganize all this on the fly, but I think that's all doable. So that's where I think we're at. I don't want to close off discussion, but that's what I'm taking away from this discussion.
Okay. Well, with that, any more comments? Corey?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. This is just a quick question. I'm in support of reconsidering how we're doing these CPS items, but I lost track of the conversation there for a moment. Where would we be repicking up some of those CPS science items and the sardine stock structure again? Where would that fall?
That would come back in April.
John?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Merrick. I'd suggest not April. It'd be best if it came back after the stock assessment. So some later meeting than that.
All right.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to support what Mr. Ugras just said. We stated that at the last workload planning in June for a number of reasons, including the one that John referenced. June or later would be, NIMS won't be prepared to have that discussion until then.
Okay. Corey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ryan, can I ask you a quick question there? You just said this discussion, it sounds like we're talking about different pieces. Can you be a little more specific on what discussion you're referring to?
Yeah, through the chair, thank you, Ms. Reddings. The reference, the CBU reference CPS science and starting stock structure. So that's what I was referencing. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm seeing any more hands, so I think we got a pretty good handle on it, especially for November. So with that, I would, anything else you want to cover, Merrick?
Just taking a look here, Mr. Chairman. Let's see, in terms of November, I believe I flagged everything that was standing out to me. We'll go back and we'll make note of this SAS MPC conflict on Wednesday and see what we can do about that. Ryan Wolf's perspectives, especially on the first day about salmon matters and the regional update. So I believe those can all be accommodated fine. We'll drop coastal pelagics from November and use that to help stretch out our groundfish matters. Split halibut into 2. At this point, I'm inclined to leave habitat shaded, and we will consider that some more. Let's see, on the YAG, we've got a couple of things. So we'll add to March shaded the CCI recommendations under the ecosystem matter. I also made note of Mr. Anderson's comment that if there isn't an agreement under Whiting to the JMC, then this would be the one time, this Whiting Treaty implementation would be the one time for the council to take up that item and to make recommendations to the secretary. So we'll consider that on the YAG and what that means for our time and organization. Let's see. Ms. Writing has made note of an EEJ update. I'm inclined to add that to April. I don't know the actual date Mr. Seeger is retiring, but maybe we can convince him to stick around past the 11th. Let's see, on June, we've added the CPS science, we call it CPS science needs and stock structure into the June meeting. And there are a couple of comments beyond the YAG dealing with HMS. So November of 24 for beginning the FMP amendment regarding the DGN transition, or yeah, let's call it DGN transition. And then in 2025, we'll start thinking about OPA again. So that's what I've captured, and appreciate the discussion.
Okay, very good. Great work, everyone. So with that, I think we're done, right?
Mr. Chairman, I'll look at our deputy director here and see if I've missed anything or if she has more to add, or maybe another council member has a question.
Corey. Yes, Corey.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thinking a little bit more about sardine now that I've had 30 seconds to marinate in my tin of olive oil. Just a quick request for NIPS, thinking about that sardine stock structure. We've heard from our stakeholders before how important this is and interest in getting access to that stock as well as conservation. And I would just request if there's at some point before next April where the Science Center has an update, if that could be provided as an informational report, I think that would be appreciated.
Eric?
Yeah, and just on that note, I have been in touch with the Southwest Center director, and we do intend to speak about this. That was something I volunteered to do at the last meeting. So we'll speak with her more, and happy to involve Mr. Wolf in that discussion too, and just figure out what's possible and when they might be able to have that sort of a report. Yep.
Okay, Kelly, good? The thumbs up. Well, just a great job, everyone, on a crazy week. Looking at that schedule, I thought at least two, probably 3 days were to go long. And just fantastic work by the staff and the advisory bodies, the management teams, everyone just, I mean, everything kind of came together. So it's going to be a quick gap, I guess, between now and November. So don't overload the staff with much requests too much. So anyway, great to see everybody. Great job and safe travels. And we'll see you in November. Oh, and I need a motion to adjourn. It's my first meeting as chair. Come on. Or Grillnick.
I'll go slowly so this can be typed on the screen. Just kidding. I move that we adjourn this meeting.
Second. Second, Bob Dooley. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right. Motion passed unanimously. All right.